Thanks, everybody. Mark Baptiste, I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at the Christopher and Dana Reed Foundation. Such a pleasure to partner with Lineage. They've been fantastic. I want to thank all the sponsors, and I think we have something very exciting that we're going to be growing here with these types of conferences where we can really share a lot of information, see what's going on in clinical trials, and collaborate more and more. So you can see, can everybody hear me? Yeah. So you can see by our motto, today's care, tomorrow's cure, that we have a holistic approach to treating paralysis and spinal cord injury. With regards to care, we have the National Paralysis Resource Center. Back in 2002, since 2002, we've assisted over 120,000 individuals living with spinal cord injury, living with paralysis. We have a peer and family support program. We have a quality of life program that has given out more than $40 million to nonprofit organizations to help with quality of life. And we have so many resources that are geared towards helping individuals living with paralysis and translated into over 12 different languages. With regards to cure, we have funded over $140 million for spinal cord injury research. So we are trying to do more, and we feel that things are just going too slow. So device development is very slow. Drug discovery, drug development is a very slow process. From the actual aha moment that a scientist has to going through all the different clinical phases, you can span over 20 years. And the attrition rate for clinical trials is very high. So there's a lot of risk involved. Everything that we're doing at the Reed Foundation now for our research plan is to de-risk the field as much as possible. De-risk it in the sense that there would be groups that maybe are not doing SCI research to get into SCI, groups that are in SCI to speed up what they're doing, and to get investors excited in seeing that there's really exciting science, exciting technologies. And we believe that we are at the cusp of a new era in SCI. We're seeing technologies right now that might cross over the finish line and get regulatory approval hopefully soon, but we need to do more, and I'll be talking a little bit about that. So we still do not have any FDA-approved treatment for any SCI-associated outcome. This is still lacking, and something that we're moving as much as we can to try to fill that gap. So how are we going to do it? So I've been at the Reed Foundation a little over a year. And when I was doing my due diligence and exploring what can be done, it really hit me that what's really important is for us to look at the clinical pipeline and evaluate it if it's robust enough. There was a recent paper by Valerie Dietz from Houston last year that did an analysis of the pipeline, and I think the conclusions were that it's just not robust enough and that a lot of things are not being reported even after the trials are completed. So when I say robust, I mean that we should have even more clinical trials, and that these clinical trials hopefully will be pivotal trials that can be presented to regulatory agencies. We need to see a greater diversity of these clinical trials. We need to see trials that are not just doing electrical stimulation, but they're also looking at small molecules, or they're looking at biologics. They're looking at combinations, and this is something that I think we all talk about, but it hasn't really been happening yet. And we need the trials to be smart in the sense that we have biomarkers, smart in the sense that when you have these high attrition rates, that a failure with the clinical trial will help you, pivot so that the next trial is going to be, more powerful and that we've learned something from the failed trial. So everything that we're doing at the Reed Foundation for facilitating research, to speed it up, to reduce the risk, is so that we can use this metric and both short-term and long-term to see if we're actually moving the needle with the initiatives that we put in place. So one of the first things I did was, rebuild our scientific advisory board. I think it's really important for all organizations to have a good sounding board, experts in the field. I really wanted a good mix of individuals, senior key opinion leaders in the field, such as the chair of the board, Jim Guest, who's here in the audience, Armin Kurt, who's at the University of Belgrade in Zurich, but also have young investigators giving us input, giving us ideas of new initiatives. So we have individuals like Ona Bloom from Northwell, Chet Moritz, State University of Washington, and then people completely outside of the field to have a fresh perspective, such as Kristen Well, who had spent time with the FDA and helped with putting together FDA guidance for the brain-computer interface, and industry perspective, such as Joanna Stanek, CEO of Exonus, and who actually came up with a really interesting initiative that I'll describe later. And Rex Marco, individuals that are living with SCI, also have scientific expertise, and Rex is also our chief medical ambassador, and he's a spinal surgeon. So the research strategy is one that will try to establish Reeve as a main field enabling force in the field. And I've categorized our strategy with 3 pillars, just for easy kind of memory. Catalyze, energize, and educate. So when I talk about catalyze, we're talking about making investments. All of these are right now non-dilutive investments. These are grants that would be given out for high-risk, high-reward projects. You can imagine that you might have an asset that you're very excited about, and then you're looking for an investor, and they're going to ask for human data. And that sometimes is a stopping point for a lot of groups. So putting in money to support early proof of concept work, I think, is really crucial. Right now, we're having discussions of potentially taking epidural stimulation, which seems to be something very promising for movement, very promising for blood pressure, and see if we can move that into bladder dysfunction. And that's risky. We don't know if that technology is going to be safe and feasible, if it's going to work to apply it to something else. That's a perfect space for the Reeve Foundation to do these high-risk, high-reward, early proof of concept studies. The energize, the pillar, is referring to our industry engagement. So part of the strategy is this right here, I think, bringing everyone together. I think the Reeve Foundation can be seen as a neutral convener to bring folks together that maybe organically wouldn't be talking to each other. And I was really excited just to see how much discussion is already happening outside today. Drug repurposing is something that fits under this column. This is one strategy to potentially accelerate a particular asset that might not have gone all the way through with another indication, but potentially could be repurposed for spinal cord injury. And we've been having discussions with different groups to see if we can repurpose drugs, because this would speed up the process. Why? There's already some human clinical data that has shown that it's safe and tolerable in at least one population, and it could be something that we can move into SCI. And then supporting preclinical discovery programs. Something that I've noticed since I've joined, I've seen a lot of programs where there is some early efficacy work that is presented, which is great and shows that it can generate a lot of excitement and some proof of concept that it might be something that can translate into the clinic. But I haven't been seeing as much that kind of work that I know Big Pharma does up front, which is looking at PK/PD relationships, pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics, what the body does to the drug, what the drug does to the body, looking at potency, looking at selectivity, looking at bioavailability if it's a small molecule. And this is all work that at some point will be asked for by an investor that will have more funds than we do. So this could be a sweet spot for the Reeve Foundation to help support that type of preclinical work that might not be done upfront with smaller biotech companies, but which Big Pharma does do it because they have the resources to do it. And I'll mention that we are going to be doing a request for applications, very much that's focused around early preclinical studies to help support groups. And then finally, the pillar of educate, which I really think is extremely important. Sometimes it is one that might be difficult to explain why it is so important, because it might be an indirect way to accelerate drug discovery, drug development, and device development. But if we're not sharing our data, for sure things are going to get stalled. For sure, you're going to be in a situation where you might be spinning your wheels in the lab when another group has already determined a better path forward, and we need to be talking to each other. The culture is changing. I know the NIH has now made it a requirement earlier this year that you have to, if you're an awardee of the National Institute of Health, that you must have an open data plan in place. You must have some strategy. The beautiful thing about SCI is that this is a community where other nonprofits, like Nielsen, like Wings for Life, they have already really helped establish that center of where you can put your data. That's called the Open Data Commons. And one of the first grants that I put into place since I joined was to give a grant to University of Alberta. They're one of the architects of the ODC, along with CSF, so that we can get a data retrieval specialist, somebody who's going to physically go to people's labs and help educate how to format the data in a manner that will make it conducive to putting it into the Open Data Commons database. This is something that's going to require everyone to work together and to be able to share the information. But I think once it starts to roll, then you're not going to need that data retrieval specialist in the lab. The lab's already been taught. They already know how to do it and try to move that data. I think it's a greater challenge to get the clinical data in versus the preclinical, but I think this is something that we could all work together for. Another aspect of open data sharing is not just the input, but it's the output. And we need to figure out how we can get this community and get people outside of SCI to analyze the data that is in there. I mean, if the data is there and no one's analyzing it, then that's useless. So we'll be soon putting out a request for applications so that we can try to leverage artificial intelligence, machine learning, different algorithms to look at the data. Because I think we're getting to a point that one individual just looking at the data is not going to be coming up with an answer and new hypotheses. We're going to have to move into a different era of data analysis. But for that to happen, it needs to be shared. And then finally, there's an initiative that we put together that we're very excited about called STRIVE, which stands for Standardized Testing Research in Vivo Endeavor. And pretty much what it is, and it's something that I've seen as being a gap in the SCI community, we don't have a lot of contract research organizations that are just neutral research groups that you do a fee for service. You can send your compounds and get them tested. And I think the power of having these types of research tools can really facilitate research. And especially if it's done in a very rigorous manner, where things get standardized, the work gets published, so everyone can see what the protocol is, and then we can establish different animal models at different contract research organizations for the purpose of accelerating research. So that's STRIVE, and that was an idea that came from one of our scientific advisory board members, Joanna Stanica, the CEO of Exome. And finally, I had previously mentioned about this preclinical work that sometimes people don't do upfront, especially the smaller biotech companies. We're going to be having a request for application soon. So around mechanism of action, around that PK-PD relationship that I mentioned before, really understanding what the body does to the drug, what the drug does to the body. Translational biomarker plans, like what are people doing already in the lab at the preclinical stage that is going to set them up for success of having some clinical assay. That's something that might seem very far away for groups, but if that's not planned out early on, you're probably going to get that high attrition in the clinic. So any way that we can support that type of work. And also early device proof of concept work, like I mentioned before, what can we do with epidural stimulation and move it into another indication, such as bladder dysfunction. So with that, I'm going to, hopefully I didn't go over, and I want to thank everybody again for being here. I'm super excited, and thank you so much.